This picture right here is a picture of a guy by the name of Ralph Parr, who was flying this aircraft. I mean, it's a depiction of him flying that aircraft. And this is a shout out to my friend Joni. I was talking to her earlier, and you can see all of the enemy aircraft. His wingman got shot down, and he went on to shoot down most of those enemy aircraft. And that's a depiction that was done. And he personally signed this for me in the now designated Parr Club at Randolph Air Force Base. And so he used to come there every Friday night and sit at the bar with some friends of mine when I was stationed there. And so I got to meet him and spend a lot of time with him actually every Friday night. And wonderful man. He is now passed on, which is why the Officers Club at Randolph is named after him. Oh, shoot. Y'all hold on just a second. Bridget, entertain everybody. There's a repairman here, and I've got to run get the door. Hold on.
Okay, well, like who actually believed nobody knew that Biden had cancer? Just saying. I mean, that's just crazy, right? Lots going on in the news on X, but not a whole lot being said. And
Okay, that was fun. Oh my gosh. So I guess Bridget's not allowed to co-host anymore. They just like
I
kick.
can hear.
They just.
I couldn't hear like 3 times. I had to come in 3 times.
Oh my gosh. Why do they keep doing that to us?
I don't know, but if you need help, if Bridget can't come back up,
she's back up, Sunshine. I'm gonna go ahead. I don't see any of the other ones. I'm gonna put you as a co-host real quick, just in case she gets kicked out again.
Appreciate it. I just was trying to throw down.
Oh my gosh.
Making fun of Biden's quote fast-moving cancer. Let's get for doing that. You know?
Yeah, you're not allowed to do that.
Apparently.
If you if you call out their fake shit in the middle of the fake shit, they get pissed.
Yeah, right. And I knew better. And next thing you know, boop, I'm a listener. They just not real big on people calling them out.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, everything's wrong with that. Well, maybe that's why you were never allowed to see his physicals.
That would explain, but and that's what I was explaining to them is one of the things that came up during our research is that that the CIA had the ability to give someone a fast-moving cancer.
They definitely do.
And ironically, there's been a lot of people, including the guy that killed Oswald, Jack Ruby. I couldn't think of his name. And the one that did all the research, and all of a sudden my brain just went blank. May
Russell.
Yep, that's her.
Yeah.
He died of a fast-moving cancer.
Yeah.
There is a lot, and she called them out for giving Ruby a fast-moving cancer. So there's a lot of connections there. So anyway, and when anybody knows anybody on anything, we know to get rid of them. So
yeah. So let me check the settings over here on Rumble. Okay, let's see. All right, there we go. All right, so we're in chapter number 2 for everybody that's here and doesn't get kicked out. The immediate demands of justice. So remember that this book started off, we're going to go through both the Armenian, which is relatively small part of the book, genocide, and then into World War II genocide, and find out who was really behind the non-accountability. So, we make comments routinely about how Nuremberg was never really an accountability. And I myself did not know the extent to which that was true. Now we have names. And that's why, this is all about naming names. Whether you're a big oligarch, a corporation, or a cog in the wheel, we are going to name names. And we are working on a project to document all of those names for eternity. When you put something out on the internet, it's out there forever. And we are going to have one place where you can go and look up everything and show its connections to everything else. That's kind of what we're working on furiously through in whatever downtime I had, it's all gone too. So hopefully we will be able to share more of that with you guys soon. But just know it's going to be a big deal. So
it's going to be awesome.
It's going to be awesome. Yeah. All right. So chapter 2 starts the immediate demands of justice. Punishment of defeated powers for war crimes and crimes against humanity was the first item on the agenda of the peace conference that opened in Paris 1919. So this is post-World War I. The previous year had seen extraordinary changes in world affairs. 3 world empires that had stood for centuries collapsed. Tsarist Russia, communist, seized power in 1917 and took the country out of the European War a few months later. Though a civil war continued in the East, the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East disintegrated. The quote-unquote Republican governments supplanted the old monarchies in what once was Austria-Hungary. Armies mutinied in Germany, and serious attempts at revolution exploded in Berlin and Budapest. Nations such as Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia had long been subordinate territories of old regimes could see independence. Existing countries wanted their borders redrawn at the expense of defeated powers of World War I. Governments that waged war had killed at least 7 million soldiers. 7 million soldiers. But that was only the official estimate. It was actually a low estimate if you went around and actually began doing research. Tsarist Russia alone lost 1.7 million soldiers. Germany, a much smaller country, lost 1.6 million. France, over a million. The US had entered after much of the killing had occurred. So obviously we suffered a lot less, but we were still at 120,000 dead. Civilians sacrificed the most. In Turkey, the ruling junta had attempted to exterminate the country's largest minority, the Armenians, through pogroms, mass murder, and deportation. They killed about 1 million people between 1915 and 1918. More than half of the dead were children. Half children. And almost all of the casualties were civilian. So they were not having a war with the Armenians. They were committing genocide. In Europe, new forms of starvation diseases were discovered during the war. Epidemics of TB, influenza during the war killed at least 3 times as many people as did the fighting itself. And most of the afflicted were children and the elderly. Sound like COVID, cholera, and typhus ripped through civilian populations. And again, if you go back and you look at the Spanish flu and its origins, you start asking a lot of questions. By the spring of 1918, the belligerents had spent about $140 billion on the execution of the war. The expectation that another $20 billion would be spent before the year was out. This was strictly for soldiers' pay, military hardware, and other direct wartime costs. Most of the victors believed that the defeated Central Powers, Germany, Austria, Hungary, Turkey, and Bulgaria, should be compelled to pay reparations to cover the winner's war cost. And that the defeated military leaders should be punished. German rulers and the country generally should be forced to pay heavy damages for the destruction. If, in the process, Germany should be eliminated as a commercial rival in the post-World War, so much the better. Officially, the 1919 conference was a gathering of the successful Entente or associated powers, Great Britain, France, Italy, and the US, along with several other smaller countries, to decide the peace terms to present to Germany in what would become the Treaty of Versailles. The conferencees made a self-conscious effort to bring defeated war criminals to justice. And I'm going to put justice in air quotes. The issue of punishment for wartime atrocities played a much greater part in these peace talks than it had in previous conflicts, for 3 reasons. First, public opinion had been a more important factor in the conduct of this war, and public opinion strongly favored very harsh punishment. The support diminished as the number of casualties mounted and the futility of the fighting became apparent. Pacifist and communist arguments that blamed the war on imperial squabbles among the rich won a widening audience. By 1916, European governments on both sides of the conflict faced increasingly difficult problems mobilizing their populations to fight. You think after 7 million dead, somebody might have some reservations. War administrations in each country tuned to atrocity stories, promises of revenge, inspiring tales of fallen heroes, as a means of bolstering public enthusiasm to continue fighting. A symbolic relationship soon emerged among the national media and the intelligence services of each power. Groups had an interest in wide dissemination of moving stories that demonized the enemy and sanctified their own actions. Dozens of men who later emerged as prominent journalists and public relations specialists, among them Walter Lippmann and Arthur Sweetser, Sweetser, of the US, pioneered modern tactics for organizing media campaigns, early radio broadcasting, staged events, and other war propaganda. Some of the stories were myths or deliberate disinformation. There was potent public sentiment that emerged in the victorious associated powers to punish the Central Powers. Popular demands for trials of the German Kaiser and his high command became a key election issue, both in Britain and the United States. The second reason why wartime atrocities became such an important issue at the 1919 Peace Conference was that for the first time, there were reasonable, specific agreements concerning what was to be considered a war crime. Each of the major belligerents had signed the Hague Convention of 1899 and 1907 and the Geneva Conventions of 1864 and 1906. The Hague and Geneva Convention reflected a compromise between national security strategies of world principal powers and the anti-war idealism of the era. Both Hague conferences had come about largely because of acute need on the part of the declining European monarchies to restrict the contemporary arms race because it had already begun to bankrupt them. Notably, Andrew Carnegie was part of this conversation, and it was the conviction of a number of other business leaders of the day that stable international commerce was the most effective means of maintaining peace among nations. Most of the major powers included loopholes intended to immunize themselves from the conventions when they chose to do so. The US, for instance, specifically exempted anything it might choose to do in Central and South America and the Philippines from the terms of the Hague Agreement. Now, think about that. The Hague Agreement was in 1899, and because we had ongoing military actions where we were actively taking over countries in South America, and the Caribbean for that matter, we exempted ourselves from the provisions of this for any actions we did during that time. So that already gives you the flavor for what the rest of this book is. It's these rules are for everybody else, but not for me. The treaties aim to make a professional matter of how you conduct yourselves. They sought to protect European civil commerce and civilians from war. So again, you already see what's building up and what's going to happen in World War II, where they didn't hold any of the business leaders accountable. All wars were supposed to be formally declared, no sneak attacks, and it also encouraged rivals to negotiate before beginning any armed conflict. And that, I mean, is at this point is almost laughable, almost 100 years later. Well, over 100 years later. Stabilizing Europe and buttressing their authority over shaky colonial empires. So again, none of the colonial powers wanted this to pertain to what they had already gotten as ill-gotten gains. They formally banned fighting by guerrilla groups, revolutionaries, and unauthorized armies, which had increasingly become a problem for imperial powers. Yeah, because people wanted their freedom. So again, one of the huge loopholes in all of this was legitimate resistance that began in a country that was being occupied by a foreign power was exempt from any of the rules. The military and legal doctrine known as reprisal authorized countries that signed the treaties to legally commit what would otherwise be clearly war crimes, like shooting hostages, mistreating prisoners, punishing enemy during wartime, so that they could deter them from further violations. This meant that rebellions could legally be met with savagery because the basic revolutionary tactics of guerrilla fighting by irregular troops had itself been declared a war crime. So any resistance to colonial powers was framed as a war crime. Represented by European and American attorneys at the Hague meetings, whose salaries were being paid by the foreign business interest. U.S. diplomat John Foster Dulles, who had been the U.S. Secretary of State, or excuse me, John Foster, the grandpa, who had been U.S. Secretary of State in 1892 through 93, represented a crumbling Chinese imperial government at the 1907 Hague Conference. I didn't even know that. Foster's grandson, John Foster Dulles, was still in college at the time. And he still went to this conference and was filling the role of a secretary for the Chinese delegation. Anybody know that? I didn't know that. Third, the issue of German war crimes became closely bound up with the debate over war reparations. Even the defeated powers agreed to, in principle, that some form of restitution should be paid to the victims of the crimes. Though exactly who fit into that category was a bitter dispute. By 1919, millions of people had been killed or maimed by poison gas, aerial bombings, submarine attacks on civilian shipping, or mistreatment as prisoners of war. All of those actions that appeared to be violations of the Hague or Geneva Conventions. The final cost of paying damages to these people would run in the tens of billions of dollars. Depending on the important part on how the terms war crimes was defined. And that's a running theme through this whole book. So it's very, very important. The definition of what a war crime is. The international response to the atrocities of World War I acquired a substantial economic aspect. War crimes and crimes against humanities thus emerged at the Paris Conference as a pivotal issue. The destruction of the old European order carried with it new political and economic opportunities, many of which greatly favored the United States. In turn, that spurred the careers and generations of scholars, attorneys, and executives on both sides of the Atlantic who specialized in U.S. political and business relations abroad. Each of the belligerent countries gave new prominence to a small cadre of quote-unquote experts on international affairs, intelligence, propaganda, along with economic warfare. As the war wound down, many of these experts went on to become professionals in newly emerging aspects of international trade, banking, and legal affairs. John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles were two of those. They were U.S. specialists on European affairs that was to shape American relations with the continent for the next 50 years. The Dulles brothers were the grandsons and nephews of two Secretaries of State. John Foster Dulles' ambition, even as a child, was to become a corporate lawyer. John Foster Dulles grew up where he sat on a lump. It was joked that if he sat on a lump of coal, he could turn it into a diamond. His family connections helped him win a position in 1911 as a junior attorney at the most prestigious Wall Street firm, Sullivan and Cromwell. John Foster Dulles was to remain at Sullivan and Cromwell for the next 40 years. This was to be his real career, the one he wanted most in life. And it was to affect greatly almost everything else he ever did. Dulles specialized in international legal services for banks, corporations, and syndicates of wealthy investors. His law firm had pioneered the practice of international legal support for multinational companies, even in the late 1800s, ensuring that such services continued to develop throughout the first half of the 20th century. His first clients in his early years at Sullivan and Cromwell was a powerful German American, Bridget, a powerful German American pharmaceutical company that we all know today as Merck. French banks investing in Brazilian railroads, US and British banks buying up all of Nicaragua, and a syndicate of major US investors who had pooled their funds to invest in European stocks and bonds. John Foster Dulles's government service during World War I became closely intertwined with his business aspirations. President Woodrow Wilson appointed Dulles's uncle Bert, Robert Lansing, as U.S. Secretary of State. Foster Dulles joined the State Department in 1917 as a specialist in political economic affairs. He soon undertook negotiating assignments for the War Trade Board, where he organized the exchange of American raw material for Danish shipping facilities, agreements with Spain for inclusive U.S. purchasing of Spanish horses and mules, important to the war effort. And that gave birth to modern economic warfare. He then spent a few months in the U.S. military intelligence before becoming age 31, one of the State Department's most important representatives at the 1919 Paris Peace Conference, all in less than 3 years. His brother Alan, meanwhile, entered the U.S. Foreign Service, the career staff of the U.S. State Department, and was posted as a junior intelligence officer to Bern, Switzerland, which of course is where he returns in World War II. Switzerland was neutral in the European War, and Bern became an informal center for the shifting groups of nationalist rivals, immigrant populations, insurrectionists, and international businessmen could meet there safely. A quote, "Where I learned what a valuable place Switzerland was for information," that's Alan Dulles speaking, "and when I became interested in intelligence work," unquote. He was assigned responsibility for being a liaison with representatives from Central European liberal nationalist groups rebelling against the disintegrating Austro-Hungarian Empire. Through Slovak lawyer and diplomat Ivan Kerno, Kerno, Dulles met and befriended prominent Czech nationalist leader such as Jan Masaryk, you spell his last name Masaryk, and Edward Benes, Benes, and many other Central European diplomats. He was later to cultivate sources of intelligence and influence during his subsequent work in the OSS during World War II and later in the CIA. Alan joined his brother at the 1919 Paris Peace Conference, where John Foster Dulles served as assistant to the chief U.S. negotiator, Norman Davis, and specialized in German war reparations and related financial matters. Now think about that. This is a corporate lawyer. John Foster Dulles is a corporate lawyer. He is there representing the United States at a quote-unquote peace conference where he is still being employed by Sullivan and Cromwell. And he is there representing them. And that's why I have adamantly said this international syndicate that has controlled the outcome of everything is so critically important, because that's John Foster Dulles's primary job. Not what's best for the United States, what's best for his customers. Officially, Allen became a member of the Czech Boundary Commission, which carved up the new Czech state out of Germany's Suderland and pieces of the now defunct Austrian-Hungarian Empire. He was simultaneously in charge of the U.S. delegation's political intelligence efforts in Central Europe. He was 25 years old. Allen Dulles was a junior member of the Foreign Service. He was actually a very low man on the totem pole, but Uncle Bert was a Secretary of State. When the 1919 Communist Revolution broke out in Budapest, Hungary, for example, Dulles's recommendations for measures to isolate the Hungarian Revolution from Russia and prevent its spread to neighboring countries made its way to President Wilson's desk. It is found today among Wilson's papers. Among his points for President Wilson: send U.S. gunboats to control the situation in Budapest, encourage the Czechs, Romanians, French, and Slovakians, each of whom had territorial claims against Hungary, to seize Hungarian rail lines, mountain passes, and other strategic points, distribute U.S. food aid on the condition that the Hungarians establish a responsible counter-revolutionary government, and begin aid and propaganda measures to shore this up. As things turned out, Wilson did not send gunboats to Budapest, but the Czechs and Romanians did indeed invade Hungary, and with their help, Hungarian Admiral Horthy, Horthy, established a new administration in Budapest favorable to the West. In the meantime, the threat of communist rebellions in Budapest and Berlin helped push the conferences at Paris towards a more accommodating settlement for the new German government. The Paris Peace Conference broached the issue of war crimes in its first official act. It created a commission on the responsibility of the authors of the war and enforcement of penalties. That's a big name. Commission on the responsibility of authors of the war and enforcement of penalties. That was to decide who was to be held responsible for initiating the war and on the mechanisms of prosecuting alleged war crimes. The U.S. representatives to this War Crimes Commission were Secretary of State Robert Lansing and James B. Scott, a senior legal advisor to the State Department. Lansing became the commission's chairman. Lansing viewed agreements such as the Hague Convention and Geneva Convention as infringements of the U.S. national sovereignty. He strongly opposed any trials for war crimes or atrocities beyond those that the defeated powers might choose to carry out themselves. Lansing exhibited one curious state of mind, observed Edward House, during a similar debate over the U.S. response to the sinking of the Lusitania. Quote, he believes that almost any form of atrocity is permissible, provided a nation's safety is involved, unquote. When House asked Lansing who should best determine the level of atrocity appropriate to protect the nation, Lansing replied, quote, the military authorities of the nation committing the atrocities, unquote. So, police yourself. Thus, the leaders of the armed forces accused of committing a crime should be the final judgment of whether or not that was actually a crime. Lansing believed that any new precedent set at the Paris Conference against war crimes would probably endanger the U.S. in any future crisis, and he insisted that his government exempt itself from the international commitments of any such legal. Lansing contended that the punishment of German leaders was undesirable for political and economic reasons. And you can see the reason why. These guys are looking out for the business interest, not Americans' interest, not the shining light on a hill and what's right and what's wrong. They're looking out for business interests because Lansing knew very well what they were doing in Latin America at the time with Nicaragua, Guatemala, Panama. He knew all about that. And he had no desire at all to set a precedence in Europe after World War I that might come back to bite these corporate interests that they were really protecting and what they were doing in Latin America. This was of paramount concern. Lansing wrote during the negotiations, quote, "We have seen the hideous consequence of Bolshevik rule in Russia, and we know that the doctrine is spreading westward. The possibility of a proletarian despotism over Central Europe is terrible to contemplate. The situation must be met. We must look to the future, even though we forget the immediate demands of justice. Reprisals against Germany and the reparations are all very well, but will they preserve society from anarchy and give the world an enduring peace?" Unquote. He also said that any breakdown of authority in Germany must be avoided to prevent the spread of Bolshevikism. This is 1919, guys. You already see the creation of the boogeyman over there is going to be used as far back as then. So there was strong sentiment among European delegates on the War Crimes Commission for tough action. The majority called for trials of Kaiser Wilhelm and other German leaders. Their resolution indicated the abundant evidence that already had been collected of outrages of every description committed on land, sea, and air against the laws and customs of war and the laws of humanity by Germany. It described the Central Powers' wartime role as systematic terrorism. They cited 32 specific crimes, including massacre of civilians, torture and massacre of prisoners, the use of human shields, mass requisition of private property, destruction of hospital ships, aerial bombardment of undefended cities, blah, blah, blah. And there's a whole list of them. The commission singled out Turkish massacre and deportation of Armenian civilians as being so grotesque that although they had not been specifically banned by the Hague and Geneva Convention, these actions were inherently criminal under the most elementary norms of human behavior. This was, they said, a crime against humanity. Lansing strongly objected to this. And he objected to any introduction of any concept related to laws of humanity. Because if you give the Armenians a voice, then every country that his oligarchs that they are really working for would have that same voice in Latin America and elsewhere for that matter. International law, he contended, regulated relationships between nations. The international effort to set human rights standards would never be enforced, he said, and their failure would undermine compliance with treaties in other ways. So it's too hard to do, so we're not going to do it. Lansing voiced similar opposition to demands that Kaiser Wilhelm and other leaders be tried before an international court. A leader should be responsible to the political authority of his country and not an international court, because we don't want the U.S. president being held accountable for what the U.S. military and other facets, like the soon-to-be-created CIA, is going to be doing. Nor his State Department, by the way, which was at the time the one doing all of this. Because the OSS and the CIA was just a gleam in their eye at that point. Germany remained an enemy power at this stage, barred from presenting any delegates to the convention. The German government claimed to support an independent commission to study the question of war guilt, offering to submit cases of accused German criminals to an international court of neutral jurists if the associated powers would do the same. However, Germany wanted to retain the authority to retry Germans who were found guilty. Despite opposition from Lansing and the U.S. delegation, the War Crimes Commission passed a resolution by a large majority condemning enemy violations of what they termed laws of humanity, particularly those of the Turkish prosecution of Armenians. This opened the door to international trials of Turkish leaders and perhaps the trial of Central Power leaders who were alleged to have committed similar persecutions of their minorities. But Robert Lansing, as commission chairman, refused to transmit the resolution to the highest council of Paris's conference, thus effectively vetoing it. That dispute soon spilled over into personal discussions among the Big Four leaders. Wilson, British Prime Minister David Lloyd George, French Premier, I don't know how you say his name, Clemenceau, and Italian Prime Minister or Premier Orlando. For a time, the U.S. delegation's opposition to war crimes trials threatened to derail the Paris conference. As Lansing saw things, he had important allies in his efforts to block the resolution, despite the lopsided vote against him in the commission. Lansing thought that the British delegation knew the practical impossibility of approving such thing against war criminals, but they were forced publicly to advocate for the measure, and they were depending on the U.S. to block it. President Wilson also supported Lansing at this point and argued in private meetings that a trial of the Kaiser would make a martyr of him, perhaps leading to a restoration of the recently overthrown dynasty in Germany. Wilson preferred to sidestep the issue of war crimes altogether and leave it unresolved in any treaty ending the war. But Lloyd George, the French premier, and the Italian premier each insisted on strong provisions concerning war crimes and their related issue of war reparations. This question of war crime trials with that of reparations is one of the interesting English opinions to the highest degree, said the British Prime Minister. Quote, "We could not sign a peace treaty that left it without resolution," unquote. In time, Wilson softened, though Lansing did not. The Big Four approved a compromise that watered down the War Crimes Commission's original proposals. Wilson believed that the compromise language would mollify public opinion and divert attention from the war crimes issue. Quote, "In withdrawing his opposition to the war crimes clause, Wilson recognized that there were too ineffectual to warrant any determined resistance to them. When asked by U.S. Ambassador to Great Britain, John W.J. Davis, whether he expected to catch his rabbit, Wilson said no. It was all damn foolishness anyway." So they watered it down to the point that they could pass something, look like heroes in holding people accountable, that would never hold people accountable. And this is the exact same kind of crap that is played on us every single time. So the next chapter, which we will do tomorrow, actually gets into a little bit more of the details of what happened in Turkey with the Armenians and shows a lot of parallels that you guys are going to see to future events. And you will begin to understand how we got to where we are today. And I think this is critically important for several different reasons. Our government for over the last 100 years has lied to us about just about everything. And you saw in there where they literally hired PR firms to do disinformation in the early 1900s. So none of this is new. It's staggering to realize how long this has been going on. And again, you had an entire country that sacrificed over 100,000 of their youth to go fight in a war that the politicians and the leadership who are representing us in these forums are not there to represent us. They're there to represent oligarchical power and what's best for them. And every issue that comes on the table is not looked at as a right or wrong, or what's best for America as a country, as that beacon on the hill. It's how can we make money from this? And what implications does this have on the oligarchs back home and our intention of basically colonializing all of Latin America? And that was at the heart of what these negotiations were all about, not about what is right and wrong. And that's the part that was just so startling to me, in doing the research and reading this particular book. And again, I love the fact that it names names and we can learn who these people are, because all of these people, as we have realized tracing back genealogy, has their descendants doing the exact same thing today. So with that, we can open it up.
Patterns, patterns, patterns.
Yep.
Just before they throw me down to listing. Patterns, patterns, patterns.
Yep. I don't know about you guys, but I find our history, the real history, fascinating. And it explains so much of why we're here where we're at today. And again, I'm excited about bringing this book to you because when I read it, I learned a lot. And at this point, with over 100 books on this subject under my belt, when I find one where I'm learning a lot, I definitely want to share it with you guys. Ron, Sunshine, go ahead. Hold on, Ron. Let me see. Hold on. I'll go to you next. Sunshine, go ahead.
Yeah, I just cannot believe. I mean, well, I can believe because I've been listening for so long, but the amount of nepotism that has been going on from our country's onset. I mean, we never knew.
Yeah, we never knew we had a royal class here. Ron, go ahead.
Colonel, I just wanted to say that it's pronounced Clemenceau.
Clemenceau. Okay.
Clemenceau.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I'm not even trying French. I barely speak English, so.
Only reason I know is because they actually named an aircraft carrier after him.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Colonel, go ahead.
Yeah. I've been following you for a long time. Thank you for the details and the history and everything else, because if you don't know where you were, you don't know where you are. And I'm still trying to figure out where we are. And I just wanted to ask you, given this, Operation Gladio and the, matrix that has been built around us, what is your take on where we are now with Trump and what he's doing? It seems to me like he's, right now, like he's fractured the Israeli lobby somewhat and isolated Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yep.
I don't know.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
And the other is, just because I'm going to shut up and let you speak to that topic, I always want to say the biggest thing that is in my head right now is how clear that this control network is that a Gold Star mother named Tina Peters is in prison for exposing industrial scale voter fraud. Please talk to us.
Yes. So first of all, I have to ask you a question. Did you ever run across an F-18 guy in the Navy by Luke Hook, Hook?
I don't know. Luke
okay.
Hook. It's a great name though for a guy who lands on aircraft carriers.
Well, it is, and he was primarily on the Kitty Hawk. He was a personal friend of mine, and he went to Air War College the same year I did. We graduated in 2003. That's where I met him. He was the second in command at Fallon and was killed in a civilian aircraft accident one weekend when he went to fly his kids back over to Fallon to visit. It was a horrible thing, but he was such an awesome guy. And so anytime I see an F-18 guy, I always ask him. Quite a few of them knew him.
So I graduated Air War College in 2012.
Oh, so you're a lot younger than I am.
Behind him, and when you said Kitty Hawk, I knew he had to be an older
guy. Yeah.
That thing, I did my first aircraft carrier landings on the Kitty Hawk in an A4 in 1996.
Yeah, so you're a little, and you went to Air War College?
Yeah. I went there, studied Russia and Ukraine for a year. I got out of the military in 2021. I was forced out by the vaccine mandate, of all things, because my stepmother was killed by the vaccine. And that woke me up and I was already awake because of the rigged elections, or waking up because of the rigged elections. But that was the thing which made me retire within 3 months in order to avoid taking the COVID jab, which is killing and harming service members to this day. And we still have not addressed it. But
so let me ask you something, because I'm going to a change of command. A friend of mine is what used to be called ALOs, the Air Liaison Officer, to a bunch of Army, and he's taking group command at Fort Hood at the end of June. And so I'm going to his change of command. So I have some feelers still on active duty. And let me ask you, because I know the audience is fascinated with those of us that lived inside the beast and the awakening that occurs in us. So I would really love for you, since you're here, and I've noticed, obviously, I've seen you in some of the comments and stuff like that. But since you came up, I would love to ask you what that experience was for you. And I know our audience, because we talk about this a lot. What was that experience like for you? Because you were on active duty a lot. You left active duty a lot post when I did. So I've had a lot of time to decompress and go through that awakening a lot slower than someone like you. And so I'm very interested in hearing from you.
Well, I'll just preface it with this: is that if they hadn't rigged that election, I would probably be dead right now, because I would have taken the vaccine, and I believe I'm the perfect person that they were actually trying to kill with the vaccine. So, when it really came to bear for me was I was in Korea. I was the deputy commander of Marine Forces Korea in 2019. And I believe I got COVID in 2019, and then going into 2020, we all of a sudden the COVID became a thing. If you remember, it was about January of 2019 when COVID started to become a thing. Well, it hit Korea first, and so all of the protocols that were happening in the United States were about 6 weeks behind the protocols that were happening in the United States. And I believe that was kind of like the test case, because it's a homogeneous society. They could figure out what they could get away with, highly controlled. Doesn't work as well, in the United States, but it did immense damage. Now, I wasn't awake during this time. I put on my mask. I did what I was supposed to do, blah, blah, blah. I've been living, frankly, just a gold-plated life and, protected, even though I did 5 combat deployments. I'd landed on aircraft carriers at night. I'd done all those things. But I was going along with the program, and then I started following this. I'm like, this stuff just isn't adding up anymore when I was in Korea. And we had a virologist on the staff of USFK, United States Forces Korea, 4-star general staff.
Yep.
And I started questioning him about what was going on. And he told me, he said, these masks don't work. However, the General Abrams at the time, named after his grandfather, who the Abrams tank is
that's an old name in the military.
Right. So I'm asking him, like, what the hell is this with these masks? These things can't work, can they? He goes, they don't work at all. He goes, they don't do anything. And then I said, well, why are we doing this? He said, well, the general likes what we're dealing with this pandemic. The the community aspect of it, that everyone is complying. Hey, we're facing this thing. We're not living in fear, which is a complete oxymoron, right? You put a mask for something that isn't there. And I'm like, okay, this is insane. I mean, this is absolutely insanity. And we were following the data. And if you remember, I believe it was the Theodore Roosevelt that the first case came out of that basically scared everybody, where they put the ship into
quarantine,
Guam, into quarantine, and we had the exact data on that. And there was exactly one person who died who had secondary issues,
comorbidities.
He was fat, comorbidities, right? Fat, diabetes, not healthy.
In the Navy.
In the Navy, I know a lot of fat sailors out there. I'm sorry, that's just the truth of the matter. Pete Hegseth is getting after that, I hope. But that we knew exactly how many, and then what he explained to me was the virality and the attack rate of it. And they said what they hadn't seen before was anything that had this kind of attack rate. It was like 35% of the crew got it. Of the 35% that got it, only 15% were symptomatic.
Yeah.
Right? And of that, how many were ambulatory, which was just as like 2% had to go to beds.
Right.
For a few days, right? And so basically it was nothing, but we sidelined the whole the carrier group. I'm like, this just does not make sense. And I'm not awake at this point. I'm like, what the hell is going on? Well, my time there was up. So I come back home to the United States and land in D.C. to go to my job at the Pentagon. And it's a promotable job. I took over the TAC Air portfolio for the Marine Corps. And so I'm in the job so that you can make general, right? Because that's what I'm up for.
I know by just the few things that you have in your bio up there that you are on a fast track. I can tell that. So keep going.
Yeah. So I land in DC and my wife and I, come into DC and I can't even go into the Pentagon for 2 weeks, right? I have to quarantine. Right? So they put us up at a hotel, which we found a Kempton in Washington, D.C. And so now we're in Washington, D.C., and we're supposed to stay in the hotel except for meals, right? And meals, I'm allowed to go outside. But the rest of the time, we've got to stay in there for 2 weeks. And I'm like, this is insane, because I go outside, and I'm still going outside, right?
Does it spread in restaurants?
Right. So for 2 weeks, Carol and I are now in D.C., can't go to work, by the way, which is insane, because this is a high-powered job that I'm going into. And now I'm sitting there at the hotel and we're walking our dogs, a couple times a day and going out. And DC is completely boarded up because it was the height of the Black Lives Matter, following the George Floyd psyop.
Yeah.
Right? So, and I didn't know it was a psyop at the time, but I didn't know that the guy had, enough fentanyl in his system to kill an elephant. Right. I mean, that's what he had. So, that whole thing is going on, but in the back of your mind, it's, hey, we still got President Trump. We're going to be able to get through this. All this madness is going to, it'll make sense after the election. I kind of figured, it's, left to the crazy communist lefts that are out there, and other folks are just doing whatever they're doing, but the country's still in decent shape. We'll be able to get through this. And then as we get to the fall, I'm watching the election, as we lead up to the election, and Joe Biden can't fill up 3 circles, right? He can't put anybody in there.
Yep.
The whole thing doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's like, this guy's there's no chance. There's no way.
Right.
And then election night, we see what's happening, and Trump's blowing it out by 9 o'clock at night. I'm like, perfect. This is great. I knew we got this. We're going to get some sanity back in this thing. And then, 6 o'clock in the morning, we wake up and we find out that all the results changed in the 7 swing states overnight. It's like completely stuff. So I'm a active duty colonel. I can't get involved, but I did have First Amendment speech, up to a point, and I hammered everything. Like, I was in Facebook. I had all these followers on Facebook because I had the career. People just kind of followed me. And so I'm just telling them, I'm like, hey, this is bullshit. This is a rigged election. This election is rigged. Call your congressman, call your senator, do X, Y, and Z. Use your First Amendment. What we got it, that whole 9 yards. I am hammering it because, frankly, at this point, I don't care. This is a coup as far as I'm concerned.
It was a coup.
And so now it was on like the 9th of, it was like on the 9th of November. And I remember this very distinctly. And 2 people went to see Mitch McConnell. One of them was Gina Haspel, who was the CIA director at the time, and the other was Bill Barr. And unless you follow the news, you're not going to know this. Like you have to be like a news junkie, which I was and still am. Unless you follow the news, you're not going to pick up on this stuff. So Gina Haspel and Bill Barr both went to see Mitch McConnell. I said, Mitch McConnell is in on this. He is in on this, and they're telling him that they're going to be able to rig this thing. And I felt at that point, I go, I don't see any way that Trump's going to do this, except he kept presenting evidence. And then the 19th came of December, and if you remember that time, there was the CIA director, not the CIA director, sorry. The guy who's now the CIA director.
Radcliffe.
He was
Radcliffe. He was the DNI.
Said,
yeah.
He was the DNI, right? And he said, hey, we're going to, the election interference report has to be provided to me on the 19th if there's any out there. And CISA held on to it and said, can't release it.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And then that Chris Krebs freak dude, deep state
operative,
compromised beyond belief, traitor, basically said it was the freest, fairest election of all times. And that information was supposed to be provided to Radcliffe, but they didn't give it to him.
Right.
And I'm like, there's just no way. And so we get to the first of the year, about January 1st. My family comes out, my son and my grandson with his wife come out to DC, and we go down to a little place called the I believe it's called not the Wing and Dove, but it's just off of Capitol Hill, Wing and Barrel restaurant. We're sitting there, and I hear guys talking politics behind me, and I'm pissed right now. Like, we're having a coup. Everything, all my hair is standing up on my body 24/7. Right? I'm like, this is not right. There's something just incredibly wrong about what's happening in this country. And I hear him talking, and it was Senator Kennedy's staffer that were there. And I said, well, what are we going to do about this? I mean, we just had a rigged election. What is going on? And he's told me, he said, well, there's a plan. We're going to present the evidence. We'll suspend it, and we're going to kick it back to the states for adjudication. I go, okay, well, there's a plan, right? And so it calmed me down until January 6th. Now, January 6th comes along, and I know it's going to be crazy. I'm watching all the information and news about everything that's happening. The entire country believes it was a rigged election. Why? Because it was a rigged election. We had industrial scale voter fraud. And I was like, okay, I'm taking leave today. I just told the bosses, I was like, look, I'm taking leave on this day. It's going to be crazy around here. They said, no problem. So I take leave, and Carol and I walk down. We listen to the president speak. And we're like, okay, we listened to his speech, and I'm like, man, this just does not feel good, because he just kind of was down and flat. If you go back and listen to that speech, I mean, it was good. He laid out all the voter fraud. It's like, hey, folks, this is what happened. This is it. Da-da-da. Now, go let your voices be peacefully and patriotically heard. And I'm like, okay. So I'm listening to him. Like, I can't participate in anything, but I can observe. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go see what happens here. So I walk from the White House down Pennsylvania Avenue to the Capitol. And as I get there, I'm seeing all these people that are saying, like, this is our Reichstag moment. That guy, Jalen X, is running around. He says, hey, we're making history, and then runs into the Capitol. And as we get up towards the Capitol, I'm standing on the, outside the gates at the Senate side of the building, outside of thing. I see these guys who I'm like, these are agents, and they're moving around, and they're moving the barriers. They're actually opening the barriers up. And I'm like, holy shit, these are federal agents moving barriers. They're actually moving the barriers and opening them up. And so we move from there kind of to I don't know if you're how familiar you are with the Capitol, but there's a bunch of trees between the Capitol and the Supreme Court. And so Carol and I just go and hang out there, and they're just kind of watching. And we look back, and we see all these people being funneled into the Capitol. All of a sudden, where we were standing a minute ago, that whole armada of people all of a sudden go into the Capitol. I'm like, holy shit, you need to get down. They're going to start shooting people, right? This is insurrection. and I just couldn't see it, because I'm a fighter pilot. I'm not a trained intel agent, but it's like I know the truth when I see it. I'm like, this is crazy. This does not make sense at all. And then what I saw was, we heard the shots going off. We heard the flashbangs. The biggest thing I saw too also was on the part of the Capitol that faces towards the Supreme Court, on all those stairs, there were these barriers there, and there were all these people lined up, and they started throwing flashbangs behind the people. And if you're not trained and ready for it, if you're in a crowd and you hear explosions going on
Right.
behind you, what do?
Right.
You move away from the explosions, right?
Yep.
And that was the mass of people who got moved into the, up to the Capitol. So, and then I just went home that day and watched the coverage of it. And I was like, holy shit, they're saying, CNN is reporting this as something that it's not, right? The mainstream media is putting out, this is an insurrection, this is the worst thing that happened. I was just there, literally blocks away from it. And I got up the next morning and I was like, that's it. And I put in my retirement paperwork. I went into work and I'm like, I got to retire. Well, get this. Within 30 days, they asked me to stick around and go to Brookings Institute. And I'm like, what? They go, well, we got a bunch of opening slots because colonels were retiring like it's going out of style. So all of a sudden, these precious slots that are there, right? I'm up for general, but no longer because I put in my retirement paperwork. Now they're asking me to go to the Brookings Institute. Well,
as a civilian or as active duty?
Active duty, to stay in it. And I said, okay, well, what's the pitch? I said, I'm retiring. They said, I said, does this obligate me to continued service? And they said no. And I'm like, okay, let's go see what this belly of the beast is that is the Brookings Institute, because I knew that's where a lot of bad ideas came from. I didn't know how bad that I do now, but bad. And so I'm like, okay, I'll do that. I'll stick around. I'll go to the Brookings Institute with no payback, which is insane, right? Why would the military ever do that? Well, they were stringing me along because they were investigating me, which I kind of figured, but I wasn't worried about it. And I got cleared on it and everything else. They did give me a non-punitive letter of caution because I said that the Chinese Communist Party has infiltrated our entire government and referenced Radcliffe's statement saying the exact same thing, right? But the Marine Corps gave me a non-punitive letter of caution for stating that as a colonel. And I did say, in my official capacity, I can say because the DNI said it, that the Chinese Communist Party has infiltrated the entire country, right?
Right.
So I get that non-punitive letter. I goes, can I still go to the Brookings? They're like, yeah, you can. No problem. About August now of 2021, right before the vaccine mandate comes out, they said the commandant found out, or someone on his staff said he can't go, and my orders were canceled. A complete shock and surprise. No general informed me or anything else. I found out because the monitor, and you can tell folks who that person is who monitors your career.
That's your HR person.
Right. That's your HR person. Just tells me, hey, why are your orders being canceled? He's asking me, I'm like, you're the monitor. Why can't you tell me? He goes, I don't know.
So
it's just canceled by his bosses. So let me just finish this.
Sure.
Last piece
Yeah.
So the last piece of it is it didn't matter. Why? Because my stepmother in July took the first shot of Moderna. 3 weeks later, she took her second shot. 3 weeks later, after that, she was in the hospital, and she died right when the COVID vaccine mandate came out. And I was like, holy shit. And I told my wife, I'm like, they were like, well, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I'm getting out of the military now. I'm like, I cannot take this shot. It's killing people. And I told all the other service members there, this thing is poison. Do not take it. And it's like the cognitive dissonance that's there. It's incredible. And like I said before, right up front, if Trump would have won that election and that shot would have became mandatory, I would have took it probably, and I'd probably be dead right now. So this is where we are, and that's my awakening. Sorry for all the long stuff.
No. I'm so glad that you shared all of that, because I want to go back and I'm very good at translating the military side to the civilian side. So I want to make a couple of comments about what you said. First of all, most people do not realize how many fat people are in the military. And the fattest person I ever saw was on the Navy ship when I went to the Roosevelt while it was underway in just south of Turkey in 1991. I saw the ship's cook because we were given a tour of the entire ship. And it was kind of a payback for me doing someone a favor. A Navy 05 that wanted something that I could help him out with. So he got me a trip with my 2 NCOs out to the Roosevelt. So we walk into the kitchen area on our tour, And I'm not kidding. The guy had to have been 400 pounds. And I looked at my NCO and I said, how did he get a uniform that big? Because he was in a uniform. I'm like, I've never seen anything like that in my life. So that, number one, that would be the guy that would get COVID and it would kill him. Number two, the mask. So those of us who have been in the military and have deployed and had to carry around our MOP gear for exposure to biological weapons, it's like a rubberized suit. I carried mine around for 6 months in northern Iraq in 120-degree weather and had to put it on several times because of quote unquote warnings. That's what it takes to protect you from a viral anything. So a bacteria agent, whatever, not a paper mask, full MOP suit. So my first response when that happened was, as soon as Fauci said, yeah, you need to wear a mask, I looked at my husband and I said, they're fucking lying to us. This entire thing is a lie, because I either got screwed for having to wear this damn thing in 100-degree weather and literally take it off and dump the sweat out of it, or I could have just deployed with a paper mask. So why wasn't I wearing a paper mask in Iraq? And I told my husband, and I said it every time I had to go to the VA because I was still being looked at for my total resolution of my disability claim. And I wore, you guys have heard me say it, it looked like women's panties, kind of a mask. It was leopard colored, but because it was leopard colored, you couldn't see. It was completely see-through. I did it in my act of rebellion to get in the building to finish my claim, because you had to play along, but I was going to mock them every step of the way. And every single person I saw, my doctor, the evaluator, everyone, I laughed at them. And I told them, this is a piece of crap. This doesn't work. You are complying with tyranny. So that's number two. Now, I want to explain something about, how do you say your first name, Gannon?
Yep, Gannon.
Okay, so Gannon is not, so what was your time and grade as a colonel? Were you just about ready to meet your general's board?
Yeah, I was actually up for general when the board had met. I didn't know the
results
of it yet when I put my retirement paperwork in.
Okay, because I was medically retired. My board would have met the following spring. So when he says that he was a shoo-in for colonel, let me just tell you that his assignment that he just mentioned, being on the joint staff in Korea, for those of you who are not familiar with the military, everything that he described about his career is, and especially his attendance at Air War College. So there's a pecking order for our professional military education. And because I worked on the Dimers project for years, which was supposed to be a joint military system, I got to visit, and I was in 05 and 06 when I was doing that. I got to visit and learn about all of the other services careers, because we were trying to put them all in one computer system, which never worked because the Army sucks. But anyway, I know enough about the Marines system and the Navy system to say the following. Their pecking order for professional military education is, it is a very select group that gets to go in residence at all. Like 2% of the entire lieutenant colonel population goes to in residence professional military education of any kind. Most of them do it by correspondence in order, and then they don't get selected for colonel. So that's just kind of the way it is. But the bottom of the barrel, and I'm including myself, I'm still in the top 2%, but the bottom of the barrel of that top 2% goes to your own service school. The top echelon goes to a other service school, and the top of that goes to National War College. There's a pecking order to it. So the fact that he was at Air War College just kind of screams he's on a fast track. He then goes from there and he goes to a joint staff. Again, those are grooming things to be a general officer. I did my joint staff at CENTCOM just before I went to Air War College. All things that they do in order for you to be ready for general officer. So he also makes the point, and to the point that we've been saying all along, Bill Barr, CIA, and the CIA chief goes to talk to McConnell. So you know that they are plotting behind the scenes. The thing that I find most fascinating about this is you have a guy that has deployed all over, has in residence studied conflict, and knows what a coup looks like, right? Because we spend a lot of time going over. Now, we were lied to about how the coup occurred. I did not know, and I won't speak for him, but I did not know that the CIA was involved in 99% of the coups around the world. But we know what they look like. We have studied details of how, especially when they happened in Turkey, because we trained all the military officers and they had coups like every other weekend there for a while. So we know what they look like. We know what the groundswell is. We know when crowds are being manipulated. So this man is telling you, as an active duty colonel who has been educated in how all of this is happening, he was standing on the grounds of the Capitol and he is watching what we have been taught to observe in foreign countries that happened there. The manipulation of people in crowds that are there for the right reason, but they are going to be manipulated and used in a coup. And I can't even imagine, because it was devastating to me as a military officer in retirement to watch this happen to the country that I spent 30 years willing to die for. I can't even imagine what that would have been like to be standing there as an active duty colonel, knowing that you are on the threshold of being in the top senior leadership as a general officer in a military that has now witnessed and participated, as far as Millie's concerned, in the coup of your own government. Can you talk to that for a minute?
Well, yeah. And so, I mean, that's exactly what happened. Like the entire facade was shattered, that day, like watching that happen, right? Yeah. Because I saw people who were clearly federal agents. They were clean cut, good looking dudes. They were moving barriers around and they weren't paying attention to us. And then I was like, there were people screaming, but I could say, it was like, these are crisis actors. They were screaming at, across the barrier at police. I'm like, this is not MAGA. This is not who the people are. And I'm watching this and I'm like, and it doesn't make sense to me at that point, but overnight as I slept on it, it did. That's why I woke up the next morning. And, for me, people have different things that they take out of the military with them that kind of haunt them. The only thing that all the things I did, the 5 combat deployments, getting shot at on the air, land and sea, getting, landing on aircraft carriers at night, all that stress. The only thing that hangs with me is standing over those caskets and those faraway lands and knowing that there's an American citizen's family on the other side of the world that doesn't know that their son or daughter is dead yet. And I did that. And I could do that, year after year and all those deployments. I could do that because we live in a free country where people are participating, right? They have a vote, and all that was taken away from them.
Yeah.
Their entire vote, the rigged elections, I'm telling you, the rigged elections are the most corrosive thing to this country, because that's what lets me say, hey, my grandson, my grandfather was a Marine. I'm a Marine. My son was a Marine. I'm like, I would like for my grandson to, find his place in the phalanx someday, but not right now, not yet. And even where we are yet, I'm not there yet, because I got to have accountability for what they did with the COVID, and this rigged election stuff has got to get cleared up. We have to have accountability. You can't, what we've got right now is so corrosive, and I'm sure there's some intel folks who are listening to this right now that are deep inside this system. Listen to me, you motherfuckers. Stop rigging our elections. Be accountable, right? Because you can't clearly hold yourself accountable, and what we're left with is the Clintons, who are pedophiles, and this pedophile cult. So you want to be protected, you want to live in a free country, we all do. Stop rigging our fucking elections. That's the deal.
So
do not steal the person's vote from Selma, Alabama, who puts their son in the Marine Corps, because that's what you bastards are doing, and you're fucking evil. Sorry.
yes, no, 100%. And thank you for saying all of that so eloquently. And again, Gannon, that goes back to you and I having spent our adult life in the service of our country. And for me, sitting back 2 years ago and reading Paul Williams' book, and of course this had just happened here. I'm reading about the newly formed CIA spending $5 million, as it turns out it was even more than that, in 1948 dollars to interfere in their first election in Italy. And so as I'm reading this, I'm like, wait a minute. If they interfered in the Italian election and they're a NATO member, that means they interfere in our election because we're a NATO member. And whether it's the CIA proper or their MI6 buddies or whatever, I firmly believe it's the CIA itself. You know that they have made a habit all around the world. And putting this in context is all of those hotspots that you went and flew, and they were all orchestrated by these people. You could have very well been one of those people. The day that I got to northern Iraq, the C-130 that I flew in on for my 6-month tour there, the day before I got there, 3 of the Army guys had went off the tarmac of the Sursink airport, and not knowing that Saddam Hussein or whoever it was had mined the entire area around the Sursink airport, because this was going to be his personal airport to fly to his brand new mansion up on a mountain that was like 6,000 feet in the air that they were still constructing. And so the airport was under construction. They had already mined it. They hadn't even finished the airport, but they had mined it. And these 3 Army guys got trapped in the minefield and died. The C-130 that I flew in on flew their bodies out. And my wartime job is mortuary affairs. That's what we're trained to do. Personnel accountability when you're deployed. And so every person that we lost, that was my job over there for 6 months, as well as being an aide to the general. That was the NCOs that worked for me. Is we did personnel accountability. Everybody that came in, we checked them in. We knew exactly where they were, what missions they were on, and then when they left the theater, we accounted for them. And that is, as you say, the most sobering experience that you never want to have. You understand, and the entire thing, now that I know, the entire Iraq war was bullshit. The entire 6-month deployment, and time away, missing my daughter's birthday, all of that stuff. And then obviously some of the people don't ever go home. And to have experienced that and know that every one of those situations that we in the military have been put in has been manipulated, and what they're actually after is the oil, the gold, the diamonds, or whatever, is a slap in the face to every military person that has ever served.
Well, if they were actually going after like national resources that the country needed, it would be different. But it was for them personally.
Yes.
I mean, actual like individual families that are corrupt to the core. And not only that, but they're engaged in the most horrific behavior that allows them to become psychopaths. I mean, Barack Obama is not who they say he is. I mean, the guy came in. He was basically groomed through the CIA. So this entire thing, they took it over, and then they manipulated the shit out of everybody. I mean, and with actually all the things that we signed up for, which is honor, courage, commitment, the idea of selfless service to the country, they took 100% complete advantage of that.
Yes.
And not for the good of the nation. I mean, literally to try to consolidate their complete control. I mean, what a bunch of psychopathic pedophiles we've allowed to take over because our intel agencies, a bunch of freaking cowards,
Yeah, I agree. Ron, go ahead.
I just want to say, I can relate to both of you guys because obviously I was in the first Gulf War, and I think Colonel, you and I have actually had this discussion, and you're right. Everything is bullshit, and I was and I was with you there. I wasn't actually at the Capitol itself, but I was in D.C. in the same day, and I woke up 2004 when I realized 9/11 was bullshit, and ever since then it's just been I read and study, and it's like to me what it really did is it pissed me off, and I think I think it's the same thing with the Colonel. When you realize you've been lied to, it pisses you off. Now, I'll be honest. When I went into the military, I didn't go in because it was all about honor and service and duty. Now, I loved my country. I was extraordinarily patriotic, but I went into the Navy, and incidentally, I was an AG, so you'll know what that is. But I had, I was very proud of my service. And I still today am proud of my service, but I'm not proud of what my country did in my name while I was serving. And I think that's the dilemma that we as former service members really struggle with. It's like we're proud of our country. We're proud of the Constitution. We're proud of and we love what the country was set out to be according to the constitutional principles, but we're disgusted with what it's become. And again, you said something very interesting. You said it's not if the country needed something, okay, yes, but what you said was perfect. They're doing this for their own personal gain, and that is morally and absolutely reprehensible to me. And with that, I'll yield.
So let me just address that. If the country had a need, we're a very rich country. We have the ability to negotiate trade agreements. And that's why this was never about anything that our country needed. We have more resources than just about any country. They have purposely not harvested our own resources because there's no other. They have to create a crisis. And you create a crisis by walling off in these national parks. And we discovered this around the world. They wall off our natural resources in national parks and then use that as the guise of eco-friendly, that you can't disturb national parks, in order to then create the quote unquote need that then they use to justify these wars of aggression to quote unquote secure resources. Well, they're not trying to secure resources. These are the Standard Oil bubbas going over there to get pennies on the dollar concessions of a devastated country that has just been blown to pieces because of a civil war that the CIA instigated for their real masters, which are the oligarchs. And they are using our precious treasure in the form of military members in order to do that. And that part is very disturbing. But Gannon, I want to go back to your original question about what's going on today. As I have said, I think that there currently, since Trump has gotten back into office, the agenda that has been set. So I've done a fairly good job of diagramming out a network. that has operated what I refer to as the international syndicate that then manipulates the intelligence agencies to work on their behalf. So, as I see it, the shotgun that was fired on day one that has continued to be fired over and over again has all been aimed at exactly the right entities. So as we mapped out the funding sources, initially, illicit drug movement and stuff like that, and you see cartel after cartel after cartel being brought down. You see the taking down of USAID, which was always evil. So I could go back over the last 2 years of podcast and have a villains list, and I would be checking off almost on a daily basis entities or people that are on that villain list that are all being taken down, at the most part unfunded initially, while they build the legal case, which we all pray will be used for accountability. But obviously, the funding had to stop. You have to allow the grape to begin to shrivel on the vine, because the more their funding is removed, the more vocal it is. It's almost as if by cutting off their funding, they expose themselves. And I think that the whatever it is that they're doing has is being done meticulously, to the point where I think, because of the sequence of events in the first 100 days and their targeted approach at exactly the right things, illustrates to me that they didn't just start doing that on day one of his administration. They had these networks of funding mapped, and they are using that as the checklist to go after them. And the farther down that checklist they go, the louder the screaming monkeys get. And the louder the screaming monkeys get, the more noticeable they become. And so while I don't know that they had every single piece of the network mapped out, I believe that the squealing is going to allow the rest of the network to be identified. So I'm very excited about what I have seen so far. And for those people who are demanding trials and all that stuff right now, you are still way too far ahead. You are way too impatient, because as my friend Brian Cates points out repeatedly, the grand juries, although some people believe some of them were already existing, has to be in panel. There has to be indictments. And then you have to have the ability to build the case to go to trial. And that's not going to happen in 100 days. So if you believe that Trump is who he is, and you believe that the people that he has selected are doing what they are supposed to be doing, and I firmly believe that, then, and I believe that not because I'm just wishing it to be true. I literally could have handed somebody in the administration a checklist of who you need to take out, and it has already been done. If I would have been there on day one and said, here's my checklist, I would be very happy right now to see the progress, because they are doing what needs to be done. Bridget, go ahead.
And just briefly adding on to what you've done, they've systematically, under 100 days, we've seen larger drug busts.
Yes.
And drug seizures than we've seen in the last decade.
Yes.
Combined.
Yes.
And that is one of the number one things that's cutting that funding off.
Yeah.
And they've been attacking us and ruling over us with our own money that way.
Yes.
And the fact that they went in and into the Treasury within 24 hours of Trump taking his oath, these were targeted. This was
yes.
a beautifully targeted strike.
Yeah.
And then USAID, and then the Institute of Peace, and then the Institute of International Development. I mean, these were strategic targets. I mean, this really has been, anybody who doesn't know, again, doesn't know the history, doesn't realize how that infiltration has occurred, will see these as just random whatever. But no, these are strategic military type strikes against the enemy within our own country. And it is beautiful to watch it play out.
And you know what's amazing, Bridget? We would be one of them if we hadn't spent the last 2 years doing what we've been doing. That to me is how, to me, I believe everything that we are doing has been divinely, and Bridget and I were just talking about this earlier today. God put it on our hearts to do what we're doing, to basically give up every aspect of our lives, to dedicate our time into doing what we've done, and presenting this information. And I have to pinch myself sometimes, because we are actually seeing come to fruition all of the information that we have presented over the last couple of years. You guys know who all of these players are. You know who these organizations are. And to be sharing this with you guys, and living through the time that we're living through right now is very, very humbling. Illini, go ahead.
Hey, Colonel. Yeah, in terms of the screaming monkeys, I think that's kind of an apt analogy. And my guess as to what's going on is these guys have all the people who are yelling about this have their own corruption networks to maintain here.
Yes.
And the problem is that a conspiracy is always sort of an unstable, it isn't a stable Nash equilibrium, because they have to keep the facts of the matter from getting out. And they can't have people leaving the conspiracy very easily, because when that happens, the whole thing collapses.
Yes.
So they have to show themselves to be trying to maintain the whole thing to all of the other members
yes.
of the organization, to try and keep the non-public information non-public.
That's a very astute point. And thank you for making that, Illini. You are absolutely right.
So that's one aspect of what's going on. The one concern that I have is there's been, it seems like one arm of this whole thing is being handled, very, very gingerly by the Trump administration. I'm not necessarily going to get into all of it. I would be thrilled if we cut off, 3 or 4 of the arms and we can get everything under control. But it does seem like they're pulling a punch or two here and there.
I think there's a sequence. So anytime you are going to, from a military perspective, from a war plan, anytime you are going to bring something down, it has to be a controlled demolition. Or you have too much collateral damage. You may have some collateral damage, but I believe we are watching a real live controlled demolition of a system that has operated for over 100 years. Again, there will be collateral damage. I think the key, and you guys have heard me 2 years ago, I said this, Trump was faced with a situation, and anybody, not just Trump, anybody that decided that they were going to jump on the tracks in front of a 200-mile-an-hour train and try to stop it, was not doing so because there were not going to be some casualties, because there will be casualties. This is a war. These people will not go down quietly. His position is minimizing collateral damage. And so it is not something that you can go in and throw a grenade in and watch who runs out. That's not how this can be done. These tentacles are very well hidden, and they're very widespread. And in order to be able to, it's almost like, although it's advertised this way, it doesn't actually work. But it's like spraying a weed with Roundup, and they tell you it goes to the root when actually it doesn't. You have to go to the root. It has to be pulled out by the root. There's not a quick fix to this. And I think that's what we're watching. And I think we are all very blessed to be living through this time, as tumultuous as it is, because I believe we are watching the return of our republic in real time. So, Ron, go ahead.
I want to echo. You kind of beat me to the punch and said some of the things that I wanted to say. It's I deal with people all the time who are just so impatient. They want to rest now. They're just so tired, and they've been awake for what, 2 years, a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years, and I'm like, think about people that have been awake for 20 years. How impatient we are. But to your point, I mean, this system has been set in place for 100 to 150 years, very methodically, very slowly. And there's you can't fix it in with the snap of a finger with just arrests. You just can't do it. I just want to say that talking about the election in 2020, I firmly believe that Trump had to lose in 2020. Had Trump won in 2020, we would not be where we are today. We had to have that, whether you call it a real Biden administration or a faux Biden administration or whatever the hell it was. We had to have that to show the differentiation between the 4 years that Trump was in office, between 17 and 21 until the last 4 years. We had to have that to show the discrepancy or the disparity. Just very similar to had John McCain won in 2008, and I actually think that the deep state made a mistake by not allowing John McCain to take the presidency in 2008, because had McCain won the presidency in 2008, the conservatives would have just gone back to sleep. But by Obama winning, it actually woke the conservatives up on a much larger scale, and that's obviously what led to Trump. So and one other thing that Bridget said about I'm seeing a very large increase in naval activity, whether it be Coast Guard or in conjunction with the Navy, of trying to stop or interdicting things trying to come into the country now, because they can't get it in through the border since the border has been reinforced. Are you seeing the same thing?
So obviously in Florida, there has been a lot of activity here with the Coast Guard. So I don't have a meter because I can't say that I paid too much attention to it before. What I will say is this: there were people landing on the shores of Florida, and our governor didn't do anything about it. Our governor has resources that they could have deployed to protect our shore, and that was not happening. That is no longer happening. So whatever changed, as far as the amount, again, I don't have a reference. I know there's a lot right now. But I wasn't really paying attention to get a feel whether it's significantly more, a little more, or whatever. But overall, as Bridget said, there's been two of the most recent drug busts, that the one was like the biggest one ever in history. So the amount of activity that has occurred is all in the right direction. And that's what I'm looking for, because you guys have to understand physics too, momentum. You had to get the ball rolling. And once you get the ball rolling, this thing is going to pick up speed, and things are going to be happening. I think it's going to be so many things so quickly. It's going to be very difficult to keep up with them once And I firmly believe there is going to be accountability. But that's kind of bringing us back to where we started. Why I wanted to share this book with you, because what we're seeing today is very different than what we saw before. If you understand what our State Department was doing in our name 100 years ago, and you compare it to what Trump's done in the last 100 days and what he did 4 years ago during his 4-year term, it is literally night and day. He's again, and Gannon said this very well. Those of us that if you tell me that I can't do something, I'm going to do it, and I will find a way to figure out how to do it. That's just my nature. When Obama leaves office and tells Trump that he can't talk to Kim in North Korea, what's he do? He goes and talks to him. So in every aspect of what Trump has done, and obviously Gannon, having served in Korea, knows the significance of that. That was a taboo. That absolutely could not have happened. And I think one by one, every single one of the things that you were not allowed to do, as far as the international syndicate and the intelligence agencies, what was the other thing he did? He stopped taking the daily intel briefs. He doesn't give a shit what the CIA says because they fucking lie about everything. And he did that during his first administration, and he did it during his second administration. He doesn't want to know what they say because they lie. And so again, if I could write the script, this would be what I would be doing. So I'm thrilled. Miles, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to touch on 2 points that Colonel you made and then also Ron made. So you were talking about momentum, and I think it's very important because of the events that are on the horizon. And Ron said that he needed to lose because Trump's even spoke about this. He goes, yeah, if you just would have left me alone, I wouldn't be president right now. I would be done. But you didn't do that. So now I get to oversee the 250th, the World Cup. All these events are coming up, and he's going to be there as president. And so that's momentum. Look, I think he wants to get us in a certain frame of mind that when we do have our 250th next year, that we're all like patriotic and happy, and so there are certain things that probably they thought about, behind closed doors at a round table. Just going, yeah, this is going to work out pretty good, So yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of fun moving forward. And that's what I'm saying.
Thanks, Miles.
Bumps in the road, of course.
Yeah.
Thanks, Colonel.
So, Gannon, I want to give you the biggest.
And of course, we had to show people in order to unite everyone behind the American. We were so split, Democrat, Republican. You had to show the Democratic voter who still believed in the Democratic Party what it would be like if these people, these sick, twisted, pedophile, crazy nut jobs, had full control. There's nothing easier to wake them up than let them have a taste of what that was like.
So, Gannon, I want to thank you for. Go ahead and say what you want to say.
Oh, just a point to Ron had made about our service, and I appreciate him. A lot of folks will get up there and they spend a lot of time on veteran suicide, and they spend a lot of time on veterans injuries in the service. And he had brought up the point about seeing this whole thing collapse. And so it goes to the point of, and I hope that the intel agents that are out there listening to this space get this, is like, stop rigging our elections and suicides will go down. right? We need the accountability. And oh, by the way, all of you sick pedophiles out there who have done what you've done, you will be eaten by this system. The only thing that will save you is actual free and fair elections where the American people who are good at heart have a say at who they throw their children at to defend the country. That was my point. Thanks.
Yeah, and again, I want to personally thank you, Gannon, for sharing your story. I did not know that story, and I I can empathize. I certainly cannot sympathize with the ending of your career. I my thank you. That's all I can say is thank you for sharing that with us. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. Illini, go ahead.
Colonel, if we can, I don't know if you want to turn it back to Dulles or not. I did have one more tie-in for you from the Paris Peace Conference. So Dulles is at the Paris Peace Conference. He's negotiating what's going to happen to Germany and how they're going to pay back, the war bond. Actually, how they're going to make reparations and everything. Guess who winds up representing the J. Henry Schroeder Bank for the war reparations loans?
Tell everybody.
Dulles.
Yep.
So he's at the Paris Peace Conference. He's negotiating how much Germany's gonna have to pay, and then he's representing the bank that's
Yes.
underwriting
Yes.
some of the loans.
Yes.
Is his next step. Talk about self-dealing there.
And I think that point's actually made in this book. You will see come to fruition all of the personal interest of these people that supposedly were representing our country. They were not representing our country. Southern, go ahead.
There's a tie in the Southern book, but that's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of bringing it to present day, I'm watching the mainstream media not really, no, they're upset about this Biden cancer news and the timing of it. I listened to CNN and MSNBC, and Brian Stelter said, this is kind of convenient. So I think, again, having Biden, and unfortunately, he was a useful idiot because it came down to Biden and Bernie Sanders for the presidency in the Democrat Party. What I find very interesting is watching mainstream media right now caught off guard and not happy. But this has shown with Biden, they know Biden wasn't running the show. Americans are waking up more now. And what Trump has done in 100+ days has been a whiplash. And because people are like, oh, I want everything fast, fast, fast. I said, he got his cabinet confirmed faster than any other presidency in modern times. So people are used to the whiplash. But the good news is, I don't wish ill on anybody, but Joe Biden ran for office with dementia and prostate cancer. Okay, just put that in perspective. This is a team around Biden that we know all their names. The FBI knows all their names. They know who was running the presidency. But Obama knew, the Clintons knew, Pelosi knew, Schumer knew. They all knew. They're all complicit. And if they never get charged or socially embarrassed and all the BS, America is watching. And they're done. They're actually seeing how pitiful these people are. Because what they don't understand and what they're waking up to understand, politicians are pawns. They are not in control of anything. They are being managed by big money and FBI, CIA. They're being managed. And we have people in there that aren't being managed. And we have one in the White House. This terrifies the Democrats because we're seeing a crumbling away that we can just see it now. But I have been thrilled to see mainstream media not happy about this Biden diagnosis. And that tells me they're waking up. And that is also mainstream media is recognizing we can't keep talking this way. We won't have jobs. And I'm happy about that.
Yeah. Health, go ahead.
Hey, how you doing there, man?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Fine. I had work finally earlier, so I got to catch your show today. I'll be missing your show. Man, I love you so much on this app. I do. I appreciate you so much, and it would have felt funny not to just come up here and say hi. I just wanted to say hi to you and how much I appreciate you and how much this whole community and this app really appreciates you. I'm gonna speak for them because the knowledge that you give us is just overwhelming, and I love you for that. So thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. It is a privilege. I do not take it for granted, and I obviously I am thrilled to be filling this role right now. I think that there's a lot of us out there that have a lot to offer. And I'm glad I found my place in the big community here. We're all hungry for truth, and I get the best of both worlds. I love to read, and I get to share the information, and so I love it. So thank you for being here. You be careful out there. And
Thank you, ma'am.
and
Thank you so much.
sure, and thank you for coming up. I appreciate it. So
no problem. And also, I just wanted to thank the other colonel too, Gannon.
yeah.
I appreciate you sharing your story too. I really learned a lot from you when you talk. So thank you, sir. And thank you for your service. And thank you, Colonel. Love you so much. I'm gonna go back down.
You're welcome.
I don't want to take up too much time.
You're welcome.
Appreciate you. Yes.
Thank you for being here. Ron, go ahead.
Hey, you talked about the media, not really knowing how to respond. I put something into the Purple Pill. It was a guy by the name of Conrad, I believe, and he put out a Twitter thread. I went back in like February, and it was all about how maneuver warfare and how the Trump administration is using essentially almost like blitzkrieg tactics with maneuver warfare and how they're dealing with the media, and the media cannot keep up. I put that Twitter thread in the Purple Pill.
Thank you.
I highly encourage everybody to read it because it is phenomenal.
Thank you. Go ahead, Gannon.
Yeah, I'd just like to say the word you were looking for, Colonel Towner, is your place in the phalanx. You found your place in the phalanx.
You're right.
And that is what we all see. I mean, that's what we all seek once we're in the military. No matter how, like Ron said, we ended up there, we did. And then once we were there, what we wanted to find is our just and right place in the phalanx based on our talents. And the idea of meritocracy is critical to that. And I'm so glad to see that coming back. And yes, we are winning, and yes, patience is called for at this time because I can't even keep up with the news. They're knocking down demons so fast.
So, it's funny that you say that because I, like Ron, so many people's heard my story. I come from a very poor family. My parents didn't graduate from high school. And all I wanted, for some reason, I have no idea why, was a college degree. Well, I mean, I do know why. I wanted to prove to my mom that I was smarter than my older sister. And it's the only way I knew how. She wasn't going to college. So that's the route that I picked. And of course, my family couldn't afford to pay for me to go to college. I spent my senior year going to college full time and working full time, and I about killed myself. So I went by an Air Force recruiter because I had a cousin that was in the Air Force sending me letters from Turkey and Hawaii and all kinds of exotic places all over the world. And so on a whim, so that I could get a free education, I joined the Air Force. You guys have heard the story. My dad laughed at me, told me I wouldn't last 3 days because I got a bad mouth and a hot temper. And he was right about those attributes. He was wrong about telling me I couldn't do something. And once you get the taste of being in the military And for every hour of effort you put into learning your job, learning like whatever your PME, like when I was enlisted, I worked on airplanes and I knew everything in our PFE, the general history of the Air Force, and could recite the stuff ad nauseum. So basically, as close as I could, I aced the test to make Staff Sergeant E5 the first time. So I found for the first time in my life, every ounce of effort I put into something, I got back tenfold. And that's addictive. And that's the reason why I chose to apply for a ROTC scholarship and I got my commission. And I found, of course, you guys have heard the story that they made me a personnel officer instead of allowing me to be aircraft maintenance, which is all I wanted to be. I wanted to be a maintenance officer. I wanted to take care of the enlisted people that work on airplanes because they're out there in 60 degree below freezing weather. And we had art majors as our officers, and they sucked, like big time sucked. We had people who had education degrees as our officers. They didn't know a damn thing about how an airplane flew. So I wanted to be an aircraft maintenance officer, and they made me a personnel officer. So I spent the next 22 years fighting against the system. And I wrote over 200 BCMRs to correct people when the Air Force would screw them. And I found every opportunity to stick my finger in their eyes for making me a personnel officer because I was a dangerous one. And I've lived my entire life that way. And so as soon as I found out that I'd been lied to, I made it a mission to make sure everybody knows we were all lied to and to provide them the truth. And that is the spirit to me of America. We will put up with a lot, but when you lie to me, I'm like, the gloves are off, you're going down. And I will die trying to bring this monstrosity down because there's no fear, there's no hesitation in my blood to do what is right. And you are absolutely right, Gannon. I have found my niche. It takes everything that I am passionate about and everything that I love to do and melded it all. And they made a huge mistake of making me an instructor in the aircraft maintenance school because I know how to present things. So they've created a dangerous animal that has now been unleashed on them. So
amen, Colonel. You could have said it better, and I absolutely concur.
Yeah. So Katie barred the door. They're going down, and we're all here to make sure that happens. So thank you, guys. It's 6:00. I got to run, fix dinner. Thank you guys all for being here. This has got to be one of the favorite shows I've ever done. So
yeah. Amen.
Amen.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Colonel. We love you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Southern.
Free Tina Peters, free Tina Peters, free Tina Peters.
Amen. Amen. She is in my prayers every night. And again, Gannon, thank you very much for being here and sharing your story. I really appreciate it. All right. So
don't forget to share the space out, everybody.
Yes.
Share.
Thank you, Sunshine. You guys take care. See you tomorrow. See ya. Thanks for being here.